That's nasty.
Welcome back to Fantasy Football. Thursday, if you are seeing this, there is an NFL football game tonight against the Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles. We're going to go over a couple things. Start and sits for the week, for week 4, players that have tough matchups. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I want to go over a couple things. I want to apologize in advance for the editing this week. I haven't had a ton of time to edit in, kind of funny background stuff or even put the picks up on the screen for you. But I'm trying to bring you guys content, 3 to 4 videos a week. I still work 50 to 60 hours a week in my regular job as well, and I do this in my spare time. I would much rather take my time to analyze fantasy football stats and then to be able to give that info to you guys to help win your leagues. So a couple things first. If you hear any noises in the background, it is my wife who is cooking dinner. We're on the healthy fitness train, down 7 pounds. And we're trying to lose a couple LBs, all right? So if you hear any funny noises, that's what that is. You see the apparel here real quick? This is my new apparel line that is launched through Gummy Apparel. If you guys are interested in purchasing any of that, I'll put the link down in the show notes, in the description. Use code ChuckNastyFam for 5% off. It's pretty sweet stuff. Got some good athletic material that just rolled out. So take a peek. If you like it, let me know. But today we're going over stardom situms for week 4. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 against the spread picks for the week. And then I'm also going to go over my pick'em pool with you guys and let you know who I'm picking. So starting off with quarterbacks, Phil Rivers. All right, through 2 games, he didn't really have a great season, right? So far, week 3, still not that great. But he had a really good year last year. 4,308 yards, 32 TDs, and 12 picks. And the best part is that he plays the Miami Dolphins this week, which is the best team to be playing against in the NFL. Look for a high point total. He's going to score a ton of points, whether it's with Keenan Allen, whether it's with Austin Eckler. I just have a good feeling about firing up Rivers this week. Start him up. Moving on to the Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray. Now the Cardinals are 0-2 with a tie, so 0-2-1. And he didn't have a great week against Carolina last week. So he threw 2 picks, and he has the Seattle Seahawks this week. And most people are thinking, why would you start Kyler Murray against the Seattle Seahawks? I understand. I mean, the Seahawks are a good team. But they've played against backup quarterbacks in the last 2 weeks, okay? Mason Rudolph, Teddy Bridgewater, they both had good games. But in that third game, Andy Dalton threw 35 passes for 418 yards and 2 touchdowns. I like my chances that Kyler Murray, Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk are going to have good weeks. So I think this is going to be more of a high-scoring affair. Definitely firing up Kyler Murray against the Seahawks this week. Third QB to start this week, Daniel Jones, or should I call him Manuel Jones? This man absolutely popped off against the Buccaneers defense last week. Threw for 336 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then ran 28 yards for 2 more touchdowns. Now, keep in mind, he did have, two fumbles, probably first game jitters. QBs don't fumble a ton, hopefully. But he is somebody that has a plus matchup against Washington this week, and they have yielded 3 passing touchdowns in each of their first 3 games. I think Manuel Jones is going to pop off this week. Fire him up. The next quarterback off the board, none other than the Indianapolis Colts, Jacoby Brissett. Now, he's turning into one of my favorite newer quarterbacks in the league this year. Now, he's not new, so to speak, in the league. He played last year. But he looks great. He's managing his risks so well. He's not panicking, and when he has a read that looks off, he doesn't just pull a Jameis Winston and throw into it. So he threw for 310 yards, 2 touchdowns against the Falcons, and has scored at least 16.3 fantasy points in 3 straight games. Guess who they have this week? The Oakland Raiders. Fire them up. I like that matchup a lot. I think the Colts are going to win that game. Not to mention The Raiders are 26th in points allowed to the quarterback position. Next up, Matthew Stafford, playing in a big matchup this week against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs specifically have not allowed a ton of points to the quarterback position. They are actually 5th in total points allowed to the QB. But, he's had a couple of decent weeks. Week 1, 385 yards, 3 touchdowns. Week 2, 245 yards and 2 touchdowns. And this is going to be a high-scoring affair. I really feel like they could score a combined 60 points in this game. So look for Stafford this week as a potential streaming option if you need him. I've got 2 more quarterbacks for you before we move on to the running backs. Andy Dalton with the Cincinnati Bengals. You might be a little bit surprised if I told you that Andy Dalton is currently the number 10 ranked fantasy quarterback so far through 3 weeks. But it's the truth. And he's got none other than the Pittsburgh Steelers division rivals on Monday night. So the Steelers played better last week, but prior to last week have given up 300 plus yards and 3 touchdowns in week 1 to New England, and then again in week 2 to Russell Wilson and the Seahawks. So if you need a streaming option, Andy Dalton on prime time is not a bad option. Last but not least, Kyle Allen with the Carolina Panthers. Now, he put up 261 yards and 4 touchdowns against a pretty bad Arizona pass defense. I really don't think that he does that again against the Houston Texans, but he could definitely have another good game. And the Texans have averaged 300 yards and 1.7 touchdowns per game through 3 weeks. So if you need maybe a last-second option or you're streaming quarterbacks and you don't have a ton of other people to choose from, Andy Dalton's not available, Stafford's not available, or you're in a 2 QB league, Kyle Allen might be a decent option. But keep in mind, he played the Arizona Cardinals last week, okay? We got to put it in perspective. Take that 4-touchdown outing with a grain of salt. We're going to move on to the running backs. Wayne Gallman with the New York Giants. You knew that I was going to bring it up because Saquon has a high ankle sprain. He's out for 4 to 8 weeks, and Gallman is the last guy there. So, as of right now, they haven't picked up anybody else. I wouldn't be surprised. They were looking at Zach Zenner, ex-Detroit Lions running back. Jay Ajayi's still hanging out there in free agency, probably in Cabo, sipping on a pina colada. But as of right now, it's just Wayne Gallman. So in 6 career games where he saw at least 10 carries, he's averaged 15.5 touches for 70 yards and 0.17 total touchdowns. If you need an RB2 or 3 or a flex option, especially in PPR leagues, because he's shown that he can catch passes, fire Wayne Gallman up. Next up, Chris Thompson, or should I call him Crush Thompson? Most people don't remember a couple years ago when he had an absolute fiery start to the season before he hurt his ribs. And, he's one of my favorite plays because in negative game scripts, he just tends to do so much better than other running backs. He has had PPR games so far of this year of 14.8, 10.1, and 14.8 in 3 weeks. So 7 for 68 yards on 10 targets, 5 for 48 yards on 8 targets, and 4 for 79 yards on 5 targets. Now, he doesn't see a whole lot of work when the Redskins are leading games. It almost is like Jay Gruden totally forgets that he even exists. But the good news is the Redskins are going to be behind in almost every single game. So fire him up as a flex option, especially in PPR leagues. If you need a running back that catches passes, that's almost entirely where Chris Thompson's workload comes from. Next up, and this is a little bit more of maybe a sneaky start, but Carlos Hyde with the Houston Texans. Now, he plays against Kyle Allen and the Carolina Panthers, and he didn't have a good week last week. 10 carries for 19 yards, but he salvaged the day with a touchdown, and he's been a decent option in standard formats. So PPR, do not start Carlos Hyde. But in the first 3 weeks, he has had 11 carries, 20 carries, and 10 carries. And the Panthers have given up 4.37 yards per carry. If you do a little math, 4.37 times 20, the man's going to get over 80 yards on Sunday, okay? They've also given up 3 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs in the first 3 games. if you need an option in a standard league, Carlos Hyde is there. Let's talk a little bit about the Chiefs' backfield. They play the Detroit Lions in what is going to be a high-scoring affair on Sunday. Now, you might have to do a little bit further deep dive if you own any of these guys, but Darrell Williams and LaShawn McCoy. The backfield's kind of a committee situation. I personally own some Damian Williams shares. I don't own much of the rest, but having a three-headed snake is never a good idea because you don't know who's going to be the one scoring the points. Well, last week, McCoy left early. He tweaked his ankle injury. Before he left early, he was out touching Darrell Williams 11-8. And in the first 3 games, the Lions have given 28.3 touches for 170 yards and 1 touchdown to opposing running backs. Now, high-scoring affair, high-octane Chiefs offense. Some of these guys are going to score. The question is which one. So, monitor LaShawn McCoy and his ankle. Monitor Damian Williams and his knee. And if neither of those guys are suiting up, Darrell Williams is the go-to. Something to keep in mind. Another sneaky start for this week. Justin Jackson with the Los Angeles Chargers. Depending on how deep your league is, if you absolutely need a running back and there's a couple guys available on the waiver wire, you know, he's had 7, 8, and 9 carries in the first 3 games, but the Chargers are going to be up by a ton. They're projected to win by 16 in this game against the Miami Dolphins. So he might end up closer to like 12 or 13 carries, and if they're up a ton, they might rest Eckler a little bit and spread the work around. So Dolphins have given up 28 touches for 214 yards rushed per game and 2 touchdowns to opposing backs. That is an average. I'm not saying total. 218 and 2 per game. You basically should look and see who's playing the Miami Dolphins. Whichever running back it is, whichever wide receiver's on there, or hell, even the backup fullback, fire them up. Last running back I have for you on the start list. This one is a little bit more sketchy. I'm going to be straight with you. But it's Frank Gore against the New England Patriots. Now, New England is the 8th ranked in points allowed to the running back. And last week, Frank Gore had 16 touches for 89 yards and a TD against the Bengals. This is going to be the most difficult defense that they have played all year against the Patriots. Now, they are at home, and if Buffalo can keep the game script close to where it's not totally negative and they have to chuck the ball, Frank Gore could get another 12 to 15 touches and have the opportunity to score some fantasy points. We're going to move on to the wide receivers. DK Metcalf with the Seattle Seahawks. Now, he's playing in a sweet matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. And if you haven't noticed, they're missing a bunch of people. And Patrick Peterson, still suspended. The other corner hasn't been playing. DK Metcalf has had at least 6 targets and gotten 61 receiving yards in his first 3 games. He's bound to have a big game sometime, and based on the plus matchup, I think it's going to be this week. So, Cardinals are giving up fantasy points like nobody's business to wide receivers. DJ Moore had 1 for 52 and 1. Curtis Samuel, 5 for 53 and 1. Both hit the pay dirt in the end zone last week. Week before that, Marquise Brown, 8 for 86. 3 Lions receivers in week 1 combined for 15 for 202 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, if you divide that in half, he gets 100 yards and a touchdown. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but somebody's going to pop off this week, and I think DK Metcalf has a good shot that it's him. Next up, John Ross with the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, playing against Pittsburgh, prime time. Pittsburgh is 25th in points allowed to the wide receiver position, and Ross didn't have a good week last week, so he might even be on the waiver wire. If you have people that aren't patient with their players and they decided it was a good idea to drop them, you know, last week he went 2 for 22 on 6 targets. I understand, that's 4.2 in PPR formats. That's not good. But the good news is he was on the field for 100% of the snaps played. As long as AJ Green, I'm mixing them up. As long as AJ Green is not on the field, there is upside here. And people have scored a ton of points against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they've given up 7 touchdowns in the first 3 games. I like John Ross without AJ. Another wide receiver for you to keep in mind on the sneaky start list, Phillip Dorsett. Now, he might even be available in your league. If he's not on your team already, you probably know that he's hanging out there on the waiver wire. With all this mess with Antonio Brown, Josh Gordon, Julian Edelman's banged up, pretty much we're looking for people to throw to. And Josh Gordon probably is going to get more of a plus matchup than Phillip Dorsett because Buffalo doesn't allow a ton of points to the wide receiver position. But Josh Gordon is going to be lined up against Levi Wallace. And that leaves probably Phillip Dorsett or Julian Edelman to be lined up with Tre'Davious White. We don't want that, but he moves around enough on the line of scrimmage to where he might get a couple of opportunities to get matched up against somebody not as good. So, week 1, he posted a line of 4 receptions for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 6 receptions for 53 yards and a touchdown last week and has played more than 87% of the snaps. So, there's some upside here. Might be a better DFS play than anything because the matchup isn't that great. But if you're in dire need at the wide receiver position, Phillip Dorsett might be a sneaky start for you. Now we're going to go into some players to sit this week. And there's a couple that may surprise you on here. There's a couple that might not surprise you at all. Josh Allen with Buffalo. Now, it's kind of hard for me to tell. I own Josh Allen in a couple spots. But has he been amazing or has he been terrible? Because he just chucks the ball, scrambles a ton when the defenders are in the Bills' backfield, and gets a bunch of yards, and then maybe gets another rushing touchdown. So either way, he's putting up fantasy points. But, you know, he won the last game on a game-winning drive against the Bengals, and he's got his hands full this week. Plays against the 3-0 New England Patriots. But most importantly, he is playing against a shutdown corner in Stephon Gilmore, and he's an ex-Buffalo Bill. I feel like players that are playing against their former team just have significantly better games. I don't want any piece of Josh Allen this week. Next quarterback up, Baker Mayfield, or should I say Baker Mayday. So he has 3 touchdowns and 5 picks through 3 games this season. Yikes. 56.9% completion rate. I don't know about you, but he had better numbers last year as a rookie. I don't feel comfortable starting him against the Baltimore Ravens this week. It's a tough matchup, and, you know, he might be on his way back. He's got plenty of upside. He has all the talent in the world, but it's not going to be this week. Don't start him. Last quarterback I have for you to sit this week is none other than my personal favorite, Mr. Interception, Jameis Winston. Now, he's playing against the Los Angeles Rams, and if you, for whatever reason, thought it was a good idea to draft Jameis Winston as your quarterback, you actually had a pretty good week last week, so I applaud you. But you also had a really soft matchup against the Giants, and it ain't going to be pretty this week. The Buccaneers are away from home, and they're playing the Rams defense, who have one of the best pass rushers in the NFL in Aaron Donald, one of the best press coverage corners in Aqib Talib, and they rank number 1 in points allowed to the quarterback position with a whopping 7.6 fantasy points per week to the opposing quarterback. So Sunday's forecast is 100% chance of giving up at least 1 interception, if not 2. Park him on the bench. A couple of wide receivers. You might be a little bit surprised about what I got to say here. Chris Godwin. Now, we just talked about Jameis. If he's against a tough defense, so is Chris Godwin. But Rams have the fourth best passing defense in the league, and OBJ had 6 catches for 56 yards last week. Me personally, I think that OBJ is more of a talented receiver than Chris Godwin at this point in time, and I just can't see any way that Godwin has a productive Sunday against this secondary. So I'm parking him on the bench. That's all it is. Houston Texans, Will Fuller. Now, Carolina has the second best passing defense in the NFL right now. They shut down Kyler Murray. They shut down Jared Goff. And Houston's also been pretty average in terms of passing so far this year. So unless his name is DeAndre Hopkins, you do not want to start any wide receiver for the Houston Texans this week. Last wide receiver I have for you is Adam Thielen with Minnesota. Now, I preached a lot in August about how the change from DeFilippo to Stefanski at offensive coordinator was going to shift the value in the wide receivers in Minnesota to the running back. It's pretty clear that that's happened. If you own Stephon Diggs, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have drafted him. Probably should have been subscribed to this YouTube video in August. I'm just kidding. But seriously, I feel for you. Adam Thielen has struggled a ton against Chicago. The past couple of years, he has failed to score a touchdown in 6 matchups and averages less than 70 yards in the last 6 meetings. Park him on the bench. Find somebody else to plug in there. Move on to the running backs. A couple of other guys. Some of these are borderline sits, but David Montgomery with the Chicago Bears. He's seen a decent volume of targets so far. After week 2, when Matt Nagy surprisingly went back and watched some video and realized that he was the much better back than Mike Davis. However, he has a tough matchup this week against Anthony Barr and the Minnesota Vikings. If I had to play any Bears this week, it would be Allen Robinson because their run defense is much better than their pass defense. So, park him on the bench. Nick Chubb against the Baltimore Ravens. This is one that I'm personally struggling with. I own Chubb in 2 or 3 leagues, and I parked him on the bench, but then I put him back in. And I just can't see myself taking a first or second round draft capital and parking him on the bench. We drafted him to play him. But I need you to put this in perspective. The Ravens have allowed the 3rd least amount of rushing yards in the league so far with an average of 60.3 per game. If Cleveland wants to score, Baker's going to have to throw the ball. So that probably rules out a ton of points for Nick Chubb this week. It might be tough to actually put him on the bench. I personally don't think I can do it. Just put things in perspective when he scores around 10 points this week. Aaron Jones against the Philadelphia Eagles. This is another one where I own Aaron Jones. I personally drafted him to play him. I don't have another option. I can't park him on the bench. But those of you that had him last week probably realized that you were saved by 2 short touchdowns, which saved his value for the week. And it might be a little bit more difficult for Aaron Jones to get going this week because the Eagles are only allowing 57 rushing yards per game. Now, he also kind of had a shoulder injury, and that might hinder him a little bit. But I think the Packers are going to be leading this game. Thus, he's going to get some opportunity, and they're also playing at home in Lambeau. So I personally am not going to be benching Aaron Jones because I don't have many other options. But use caution when you're firing him up this week. Don't expect him to get 25, 30 points, although I hope he does. Last but not least, Todd Gurley. There's very few people that love Todd Gurley more than myself. Big fan. Traded for him in a dynasty league knowing that he has an arthritic knee. It's a travesty. And, you know, he's got a tough matchup, okay? Tampa Bay has been pretty quiet about shutting down the run, but 7.7 PPR backs to any back this season is their average, including Christian McCaffrey, who had 7.3. You probably can't sit Todd Gurley. I can't sit Todd Gurley. I just want you to be aware of the expectations going into Sunday's tilt with the Buccaneers. So that is what I have for Start Sit-em this week. As always, drop some questions, comments down below. If you have any specific roster questions that I can help you with, put them in the comments. I try to respond to all of them. Let's go over a couple of my picks for the week. Here we are in a pick pool, all right? My pick pool, I have Green Bay winning tonight at home against Philadelphia. I have Manuel Jones and the New York Giants beating Washington at home. Baltimore against Cleveland seems like a no-brainer. New England on the road against Buffalo. I just can't see Buffalo pulling that out. Indianapolis against Oakland at home. Houston at home against Kyle Allen and the Panthers. The Falcons at home against the Tennessee Titans. Kansas City on the road against Detroit. The Chargers on the road against Miami. Surprise, surprise. The Los Angeles Rams at home against Tampa Bay. Seattle on the road against Arizona. Minnesota on the road against Chicago at Soldier Field. Denver at home. Please, God, win a game this season. My Broncos have looked awful so far. New coaching staff is what I'm blaming it on. As soon as everybody gets attuned to Vic Fangio, to Rich Gangarello, to Joe Flacco, to the different schemes, which is probably going to be 2020 by the time that they're actually decent. Just beat the Jaguars at home, for God's sakes. Dallas on the road against New Orleans, and then Pittsburgh at home on Monday night against Andy Dalton. I just have a feeling that prime time, Andy Dalton's going to throw a pick or two. Now, real quick, let's look at Sunday the 29th. We're going to do official against the spread picks. First and foremost, Thursday, Green Bay Packers -4 at home. I think it's a good pick. I might be a bit of a homer in this one because I'm semi-close to Lambeau Field, in where I live and reside and go to work every day, and there are Packers fans in the streets. God help me. But I'm taking the Packers -4 tonight. Moving on to Sunday. That is an official pick, by the way. Locked and loaded. Packers -4. Other picks for the weekend. I like the Baltimore Ravens at home, -7 against the Browns. They have not played well. And last but not least, I'm not betting on the Los Angeles Chargers on the road against Miami because somebody is not going to cover against the Miami Dolphins. And I have a feeling it's going to be the Chargers this week. Last pick, Kansas City Chiefs -6.5. Now, the Chargers, who are not as good of a team as the Kansas City Chiefs, should have beaten the Detroit Lions. They had 2 touchdowns called back. They had a fumble on the goal line, and they had 2 missed field goals. If they can beat the Lions as they should have, so can the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes is going to take them to school, and this 55-point over and under is going over. There's going to be a lot of scoring in this game. My other official pick, Kansas City -6.5. That's all I got for you right now. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the stream. Questions, comments down below, and make sure you hit that subscribe button, support the channel so that we can all make money together. I will see you soon. Go Pack.
Guess we'll see you around.
All right, check you later.